Welcome, everybody. So first of all, whatever you do not think of a purple striped zebra. And particularly do not think of 3 purple striped zebras frolicking together. But it's too late for that, isn't it? Because you've already thought of those things. Because as soon as I propose what you should not do, in order to not do it, you have to first think of it and then negate it. You see how that works? Was there anybody here who was able to not think of a purple striped zebra? It's not possible. So why on earth am I mentioning this? It's a strange thing, right? Well, actually, it's pretty important. So have you ever noticed in your life that there are things that you try to avoid? So just think about things that you try to avoid. You try to avoid the things that you don't like, right? You try to avoid the things that when you think about those things or you encounter those things, you feel bad, right? You try to avoid those things. So the logic usually is something like, if I think about this thing, or if I encounter this thing, then I feel bad. And therefore I should avoid it. Right? Because I don't want to feel bad. So I should avoid it so that I don't have to feel bad. Because who wants to feel bad? Anybody here who wants to feel bad? We don't want to feel bad, right? We want to feel good. It's natural. So the logic seems like good logic. But unfortunately, it's very flawed. Because in order to not think about the thing, you have to first think about the thing. So somebody already typed into the chat, energy flows where attention goes. Yes. And so this is often part of the logic, because they said, well, yeah, but Joey said the law of attention is that whatever you put your attention on, that's where the energy goes. And therefore, I would be a fool to think about the things that I don't want to think about. Makes perfect sense, except that in order to not think about the thing that you don't want to think about, you have to first think about it. You see how that works? So if you're trying not to think about something, if you're trying to avoid something, just pay attention and notice where your attention is already going. Your attention's already going to the thing that you're trying to avoid. By trying to avoid it, your attention is going to it. Therefore, what happens? You get more of it in your life. So I'm going to propose to you today some very simple, very powerful things that you can do to remedy this. And this is going to be enormously helpful, because whatever you are trying to avoid in your life, if you try to avoid it, then your energy goes to that. And what that means is 2 things that are undesirable to you. Number 1, you're giving energy to what you don't want. Number 2, you are not giving that energy to what you do want, right? So it's a double whammy. You say, I just don't want this. I don't want this. I don't want this. Don't think about it. Avoid it at all costs. And by doing that, you're putting your energy toward the thing that you don't want. And because you're investing that energy in what you don't want, you don't have that energy to invest in what you do want. And then you wonder, why am I not getting what I want? Now, this can happen so that it becomes an unconscious habit. So oftentimes we will try to avoid things so consistently for such a long time that eventually it becomes like white noise. What do I mean by that? So if you've ever had the experience where if you've been in a room with a refrigerator where the compressor is running for a while, uh, after a while you tune it out, you stop noticing it. It's only when it shuts off that all of a sudden you realize, wow, it's so quiet all of a sudden. Because your nervous system will tune out whatever it deems it is unnecessary, right? Because if the thing is just constantly there, your nervous system says, well, why am I going to pay attention to this? It's just always here. It's not important. I don't need to give attention to it. So if you have a habit of trying to avoid something that has been going on and on and on and on and on, eventually your nervous system, to save energy, says, well, just tune that out. I'll just maintain this avoidance strategy, but you don't need to be aware of it. So oftentimes you're not even consciously aware of all of the avoidance that's going on. But you can become aware of it, right? Like when continuing with that metaphor, when the compressor shuts off on the refrigerator, and suddenly you realize, in contrast, wow, it's so silent. You can then reflect and notice, oh yeah, the compressor was running. The refrigerator was making noise. That's what it was. So the contrast is really helpful because it helps you to become aware. So you can become aware of all these things. It's just that moment to moment, you might not be so aware. But if you just are watchful, observant, you'll start to notice these things. So that's also the power of intention. If you set the intention to become more aware of all the ways in which you have been squandering your energy trying to avoid things that you perceive as undesirable, you will become more consciously aware of those things. Now, why would you want to do that? Because hopefully it's clear, but I'll just kind of spell it out so that it can hopefully be really clear. So on the surface, okay, you might be thinking, well, I don't want to feel bad. So I should try to avoid the things that cause me to feel bad, right? And I can understand that intention, right? I mean, I also intend to feel good, right? So like you, I intend to feel good. But wouldn't you say that it's more important to actually be free than it is just to momentarily feel not bad? Because if we kind of tell the truth about it, it's not really about feeling good. It's really just trying to avoid feeling a little bit bad here and there. And the consequence of that over time is that that adds up to an impingement upon your freedom. Because you say, I can't think about this. I can't go there. I can't talk to that person. I can't do this kind of thing. I can't do that kind of activity. I can't go to that place. I can't eat that kind of food. I can't breathe in that kind of thing. I can't. And so all of these options get shut off and your world gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And you say, gee, why can't I have the experiences that I want to have? Gee, why can't I manifest what I want to manifest? Well, take a look. Would you say that you would have a greater likelihood of achieving something if you have more options or if you have less options for how to achieve it? Like if you had only one route that was available to you to get to some place that you want to go. Let's say there's some restaurant that your friends have invited you to. And you say, oh, it sounds like such a nice time, nice restaurant, nice friends. I'd really like to go. But according to you, you have only one possible route that you can use to get there. And unfortunately, today, the roads are closed. Well, then you're going to just what? You're going to throw up your hands and you're going to say, gee whiz, I guess I can't go. I'd like to, but I can't. And then you could sit at home and get frustrated and say, life never works out for me. You know, it's unfair. It works out for other people. It doesn't work out for me. What's wrong with me? But in life, it's very, very, very unlikely that there's only one route. I mean, if you're willing to be creative There's always more than one route. Now, this is an interesting story. Not that interesting. It's not that interesting, but I'll tell you a story. People like it when I share a little bit about my own personal life. So I actually once lived somewhere at a time in my life. So some of you might know this, and if you don't, then you'll find out something about me. There was a time in my life when I was extremely limited. I had limited myself incredibly. I had taken many options off the table. I had a lot of fears and phobias, tremendous amounts of anxiety. And so I believed that many things were dangerous that were not dangerous at all, but I thought they were really dangerous. And among them, I had this extreme phobia of fast food. So much so that I believed, and this is how insane I mean, I wasn't insane because I knew it was an insane. I knew these were insane thoughts. I just didn't know how to deal with it in a better way. But I had these insane thoughts that if I saw trash from a fast food establishment on the road, I couldn't continue on that road. Now, living in America, I don't know what this is like in other places, but living in America, that limits options pretty severely. And at the time I lived in New Mexico, and New Mexico is an interesting place in many regards, among which is that it's in the place, at least in the part of New Mexico where I lived, it was desert and desert. So there's not a lot of green. There's not a lot of growth. And so it's really easy to see the trash all over the place. Whereas in places that are much more green with a lot more growth, the trash can hide, hides in the grasses and things like that. But in New Mexico, not so much. It's just there for everybody to see. Well, I lived in a place at that time where there was actually only one road in and out. So, and there was a time when there was a piece of trash from, I think it was Wendy's or something. It doesn't really matter. And I freaked out about it. Like I can't go anywhere. I'm stuck. I thought I was stuck. Now you're probably thinking that's crazy, and it was. I mean, it's a crazy thought, but it illustrates how there it was. So I mean, there was a road in and out, but I had blocked that road with my own thinking. But then we could say, oh, but there is only one route. Not true. There was not only one route. There was only one road, not only one route. Right? I could have walked. It's just there was only one way to go with the car that I had. If I, but I could have gone other routes. If I was really creative, I could have walked. I could have, off-road biked. I could have, I could have found alternatives. I happen to live next to a river. I could have taken, a water route. I mean, there were many ways I could have gone. But I had determined that I was stuck because I thought there's only one route and that route is blocked. So it's sort of like the analogy that I gave of if you want to go visit with your friends at a restaurant, but you think there's only one route and the roads are closed that day, then you can't, according to you, you can't go. But life is not actually like that. There are many options available, but we close ourselves to those options because we're trying to avoid things. Just like I was trying to avoid the bad feelings that I had associated with fast food establishments, right? So in my mind, fast food establishments meant I feel bad. That's how it had worked out in my mind. As crazy as that might be, that's the association in my mind. And because I didn't know how to challenge it or question that or do anything different at that time, I felt stuck. So if you take a look in your life, you might notice that there are things like that for you. Now, it might not be as crazy as it was for me, right? Because I mean, one of the benefits, by the way, and not that I'm advocating for having that kind of severity of we'll call it mental health problems. I wouldn't wish that upon anybody, but one of the benefits of that is that it certainly eventually forced me to take a really good look, right? Because think about it, if a person becomes that severely limited in their perception of life, where they think I can't go anywhere because there's a piece of trash on the road, then they have so severely limited options that there's not a lot of room anywhere to continue in life. So either that person is going to, maybe not stay in human form for very much longer, or they're going to suffer incredibly, or they're going to have to figure something else out, right? And blessedly for me, I had to figure something else out. I mean, that couldn't, amazingly, that actually did continue for another like three and a half years after that, which is amazing. Before finally I did something differently. But if a person continues believing that if I think about something or encounter something and I feel bad, that means that I should avoid that thing. If a person continues with that belief, the consequence is, well, basically what I just spelled out, right? I mean, either you're just going to keep limiting yourself and you're going to suffer a tremendous amount, or you're going to have to do something different in your thinking and in the way that you perceive things, and eventually in your actions. So, and I don't mean to, for those who are not American, I do not mean to paint the picture that America is just covered with trash or anything like that. Sorry, it's a beautiful place. I mean, it's just that it does so happen that there are a lot of fast food establishments, and people do, for whatever reason, they don't seem to be able to keep the trash in their vehicles long enough to get it to a trash receptacle. It just flies out the windows. I don't know why that is. Somebody should investigate that. I think it must be some kind of, some kind of flaw with American vehicles or something. I don't know. Anyway, so now, if you think about it, it's kind of like if a person, imagine a person has a shackle on their leg. You know what a shackle is? Think about, like it's like a, a thing that goes around their leg. Okay, and imagine that shackle has a big chain attached to it, and attached to the chain is a giant heavy ball. You've heard of these things, the ball and chain? So imagine that for a moment. Now imagine a person, I don't know, you could imagine yourself, for example, maybe somebody else, having one of these balls and chains attached to a shackle on their leg. And imagine that this person wants to move forward in life, right? They want to achieve things. They want to go somewhere. They want to do something. And their strategy is, I'm going to try and just avoid the ball and chain. I'm not going to look at it. I'm going to avoid it at all costs. Think that's going to work very well? I don't think so. But that's how a lot of people are approaching things. They think, well, I'll just avoid, and somehow I'm going to be able to achieve the things that I want. Somehow it's going to work out. And then they throw up their hands at some point and say, I don't know why it's not working out for me. Why is everything so hard? Well, take a look. Maybe you've got a ball and chain. So, is this clear? Does this make sense? Is anybody not convinced yet that if you're not convinced that how do I say this? If you still think that trying to avoid the things that you feel uncomfortable with, that you feel anxious about or stressed about or fearful about or whatever, if you still think that that's a good, effective strategy that's going to work out for you, please let me know in the chat. Otherwise, I'll move on to the part where I'll suggest some other alternatives for what you might want to do. Nobody's saying anything yet, so hopefully I've painted a clear enough picture. So now here's what I will propose is a better approach. A better approach is to actually release the associations and to stop representing the things in the same way in your mind. So when you change the way you represent it, then you can actually release the unhelpful associations. And then this will give you greater freedom, greater options, so that you can actually start to choose where to invest your energy, instead of just having it automatically go to the things that you're trying to avoid. So there are a couple of things that I'm going to propose to you that can be very effective for this. To start, I'll tell you a little bit more about my story as well. So, and some of you will know this because some of you will have, I've written about this in some of my books. So for what happened for me was at a certain point, I was, became very desperate. Desperation, by the way, means it's synonym for hopelessness. So hope is, if you think about hope, a lot of people think hope is a good thing, but actually hope is terrible. Hope is, what hope is, the definition of hope is when you have no sense of agency. You have no sense that there's anything you could do, but you still are keeping your fingers crossed that there might be some positive outcome, but you have no power to do anything differently. That's what hope is. So hope is a terrible strategy, one that I would not wish upon anybody. But even worse than that, in some respects, is hopelessness, because hopelessness is basically the same as hope, except you no longer have hope, right? So it's still that you have no sense of agency. There's nothing that you can do, but now you don't even have hope. So for a long time, I still had hope, which is terrible, because as long as I had hope, there was a sense that something was going to change. Like I could keep doing the same insane things and that somehow it was going to change. So in that sense, hopelessness or despair was a blessing, but it certainly didn't seem like it at the time. So there I was after all of these years. I mean, this was many, many years of this kind of strategy that in my life of avoidance. I was just trying to avoid everything that that felt very uncomfortable to me, which was eventually everything, pretty much. And then I got to a point in 2012 when it was just very clear that that could not continue. I mean, there was no way I could not continue in that way. And so I prayed, and I at that point I finally received some clarity. And recently I hosted a class where I shared a little bit more about my story, and I told more about how that translated into a particular way of understanding that can be very helpful. But here I'm going to talk about it in a different way. Because what came to me then was I discovered something called EFT. Some of you may know about this, emotional freedom techniques. It's the tapping thing. Okay. So I did this tapping thing for a while. If you don't know about tapping, it doesn't matter. It's not that important. But it's a thing you tap, and then, like so many of these things, then now there's probably, there's probably thousands of different tapping strategies, right? Some people will say you should do it this way, and other people say do it this way, and you should tap on these points, and people say never tap on those points, and some people say, well, do these affirmations while you tap, and some people say do these different affirmations when you tap, and some people say never do affirmations when you tap, that will make it all not work, and some people will say all these different things. But fortunately, at that time, I read a book, and I just did what the book said. I didn't question it or doubt it, and I got results. Okay, so and so the process that I was using was I was tapping on all the points that were given, and I was using the affirmations the way that it was suggested to use the affirmations. And the affirmation was like, even though I have this, whatever, even though I think I'm insane and stupid and miserable and I'll never be well, I still completely love and accept myself. And then just keep tapping. I love and accept myself. or I'll never be well. I'm a miserable failure, and just keep doing that until eventually the charge goes away. And so I did that, and I did that a lot. I did that so much that eventually I was like, I'm really tired of tapping. Like the tapping, the energy required for the tapping was too much. And so, but I was like, but I still have too many things that I'm still trying to avoid. So I needed to find another way. So I was like, okay, well, I could imagine that I'm tapping. So I would imagine that I was tapping, not actually physically tapping. I was really weak, physically weak at the time too. I should mention that, so it was like, it was taxing to do all the tapping. And so I would imagine, and then even that became too much. I was like, even just imagining the tapping is kind of too much effort. And so then I was like, okay, well, maybe I could just not do the tapping and see how that works. What if I could just do it without the tapping? Just the same thing, but minus the tapping. And it's like, oh, I'm still getting results. So I was like, okay, maybe the tapping is not necessary. Maybe the tapping is just like superfluous to the whole thing. And it seemed to be true. So it's like, okay. So then after a while, I started to be curious, well, what's the actual mechanism involved in this? And I realized, well, a big part of it is that I'm actually just facing the things that I was otherwise trying to avoid. Imagine that, because the deal was with the setup, with the style of EFT that I was doing, it was uh, even though, and then whatever the thing is that I was trying to avoid, right? So if I'm trying to avoid that, um, if let's say I'm trying to avoid the fear of fast food establishments. Okay, so you say, even though I have this fear of fast food establishments, I still love and accept myself. Right. So I'm just facing it head on. I'm saying, I'm not trying to avoid it. I'm just being forthright about it. Even though I have this fear, I still love and accept myself. And so I realized, well, probably actually facing the thing is helpful, a pretty significant part of this. Right. Um, and so, uh, and and then I thought, well, but it seems like there's a little bit more to it than just that, because there's also this alternation between the facing the thing that I'm afraid of, and there's this other thing that's creating this space of I love and accept myself. So there's this kind of alternation of, on the one hand, I'm facing the thing, and on the other hand, I'm also acknowledging that there's this space of love and acceptance. So these can coexist. This fear and the love and acceptance, they can coexist. So if you want something really simple, you could start with that. You could start with just allowing this alternation of, on the one hand, facing the thing just in your thinking, in your imagination, the thing that you're trying to avoid, whatever that is. And on the other hand, this spaciousness of love and acceptance. So you can just try that out. And just do that until the charge drops. So you can get it, just get a subjective sense of the charge on the issue at the beginning. So people refer to this as SUDS, subjective units of distress, I think is what that acronym stands for. And you can just, on a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10, you can give a number to that, right? So if I think about, okay, when I think about McDonald's, I'm thinking about, like, just if I just think about McDonald's, and I'm like, what's the subjective units of distress on that, on a scale from 0 to 10? And I'm like, it's at least a 9. I'm like really stressed out just thinking about just the word McDonald's. If you think that's funny, I mean, imagine how awful that is. Um, so Okay, so that's my baseline. That's the starting point. So then I can do that. So I say, okay, so even though I have this fear of McDonald's, I completely love and accept myself. So I'm just alternating. I have the fear of McDonald's. I love and accept myself. I have the fear of McDonald's. I love and accept myself. I have the fear of McDonald's. I love and accept myself. And then if I notice there's a lessening of the charge on it, and then I'm like, okay, what what is it now on a scale from 0 to 10? I'm like, well, now it's like a 3. Okay, great. So could then continue that until it gets it down to a 0. And then I could try and increase that charge. So bring it back. It's like, okay, well, so just thinking about McDonald's is not enough. What if I imagine, like, when I was 16 years old, I actually worked at a McDonald's, which I don't recommend. I mean, if you really need the money, I suppose you could do it, but um, not there are worse jobs. But I actually have a reference point to imagine spending 8 hours a day in a McDonald's, and then I know what that experience was going back home and just like couldn't get the smell off. It was just sort of nauseating. So I could imagine, okay, well, what if I was in the McDonald's? What if I was eight hours in the McDonald's, and what if, like just up the ante some, it's okay. What if I was like emptying the the what do they call them? I don't know what they call them, the grease thing, and like spilled on me, like something that would kind of increase the charge. I'm like, okay, when I imagine that, what's that on a scale from 0 to 10? I'm like, man, that's like a 7. Yeah, it brings back the charge. Okay, so even though I'm working at McDonald's and I spill the grease on myself, I still love and accept myself. Okay, so just facing the thing that I'm trying to avoid, and then alternating with this space of love and acceptance, can bring down the charge. And when I can no longer bring back the charge, no matter what, and I'm like, okay, what do I have to do? I'm like, nothing. There's nothing I could, if there's nothing I can do to bring back the charge, that's pretty amazing. And so it's possible. I found that it's possible to do that with anything. So that's one thing you could try. But I just see their messages here. So I don't know if I can read those and respond to them right now, but I'll get to them later. So if you so a lot of time, that's great. Okay. Now, where it becomes challenging is if the level of distress is too high to actually even be willing to do that. And what do I mean by that? So sometimes, people are like, what, it's just too, I can't even allow myself to imagine the thing, because even to imagine imagining it is too terrifying to me. This like puts me into a panic or something like that. And so that's problematic, obviously, because if you can't allow yourself, or if you won't allow yourself to actually do that, then you can't get the benefits. So here's another way that it's possible to understand this. And this is based on, there's something in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, called the fast phobia cure, which has gotten very good results for many people. And it's one of those things, if you were to Google it, I don't recommend it, but if you were, you would probably find, again, it's like, you'd probably find 1,000 different people arguing that their way is the only way that works, which is, it can't be true, because many, 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 many people have gotten results from different variations on it. So it can't be that there's only one way that works. But I will say that a lot of the ways that people do it add unnecessary stuff, sort of like with the EFT, right? So it turns out, at least in my experience, doing the tapping is not actually necessary. Now, maybe you will find that's different for you, and that's fine. Do whatever works for you. But similarly with the fast phobia cure, I found that a lot of the things that people think are necessary turn out not to really be necessary. So it can be greatly simplified. And so I'm going to present that to you now, the simplified version. And so the essence of that is really to become aware of the response that you have rather than and to dissociate from the response rather than all the other things that people add into it. So people add complexities that are really above and beyond what's actually necessary. So here's the essence of it, is that you could imagine, first of all, oftentimes when people have these very strong reactions to something, whether it's a phobia or it's a fear or whatever it is, it's usually because they're imagining, and they may not be conscious of this, but they can become conscious. They're usually imagining themselves in that situation in the first person, associated into the experience. And it's usually big and loud and fast, and therefore terrifying. So if a person has a fear of dogs, then usually what they're doing is they're usually unconsciously, they're imagining themselves in a situation, first person, immersed, associated into the experience of, like the scary dog attacking them. And it's all usually blown out of proportion. It's big, it's fast, it's loud, it's terrifying. Well, that's not a very resourceful state, right? That's like a panicking state. And so therefore, no wonder a person is thereby experiencing panic, because they're producing that state by what they're doing. And so when a person becomes aware of that, what they can do is they can shift that by imagining it from a third person perspective. So instead of imagining yourself first person associated into the experience, you can move it away from you. So you could imagine seeing a screen. Like you could have your computer screen or your phone screen or your whatever at some distance from you. And imagine that you have on that a video of whatever you want to avoid, so that you can actually see yourself in the video. And oftentimes you could also like turn down the volume, you could slow it down so that it reduces the intensity of the experience. That's the number one thing, right? So you want to reduce the intensity so that you can actually start to face it instead of trying to avoid it. So just doing that much can be really helpful. But you can then do even better than that, which is then you could imagine that now imagine that you have a video of yourself watching yourself watch that video, right? So imagine that you have your screen where you have the video of yourself with whatever the experience is. So let's say it's a person has a phobia of dogs. So they could imagine that they have they're looking at a screen, they're looking at their phone or whatever, with playing a video, seeing themselves with the dog. Now they could imagine that there's another device recording them watching that screen. And then they could imagine that they're now watching that video of themselves watching that screen, right? So now it's a double dissociation. You're not just watching yourself on the screen, you're watching yourself watch yourself on the screen. So this does a number of things, but among the things is that it can dramatically reduce the intensity of the experience, even though you can actually be present for the experience. And it can actually allow you to become aware of the subjective experience versus what you think of as some objective experience. It's not really objective. So just doing that oftentimes is enough. And this is amazing. There are countless examples of, I mean, I guess they could be counted, but there are a lot of examples of people who have cured themselves of longstanding phobias using that simple process. And it can happen in just a matter of minutes, and it lasts. So if you find that your that the intensity of your experience is such that you have difficulty doing the first approach that I described of just saying, you know, even though I have this whatever, I love and accept myself, and just alternating with that. If that intensity is still too great for you, then you could try this second approach. So that's another approach that can be very helpful. Um, and then I'm going to share with you even a third approach, which uses some of this in many ways. It's similar to the second approach that I described. This third approach is based on something called the Wholeness work that was developed by Connie Ray Andreas. She developed this model for her own benefit, and she actually modeled this based on Ramana Maharshi. And exactly what her process was for that, I don't know, but that was the inspiration. And the story goes that she was really looking for help in her own life, and she was looking in spiritual circles, and particularly in non-dual circles, and many of the teachers that she would go to would tell her, there's nothing you can do, and in fact, if you do anything and you get a result, then that's not it. That's not what you're looking for. So if you do something and you get a result, that's not the real result. There's nothing you can do. And she found that to be frustrating, to say the least. And she maybe didn't really believe it fully. It just didn't make sense to her. You know, like many things, um, like the other two things that I mentioned, a lot of the times what happens is that there are just these sort of mythologies that get built up, and people believe their own stories. So, you know, it's like somebody, the thing with EFT, there was a guy, I think something Callahan, I can't remember his first name. He developed this thing called TFT, which was, I don't know, thought field therapy. And it was all very complicated. There were different, you had to tap in different patterns for different types of things. And then people were doing that for a while, and they're like, okay, this is working. But then somebody it was Gary Craig, realized, well, we could just have a simplified universal protocol, tapping protocol, that will work for everything. Instead of having all these different protocols, it's very complicated. We could just simplify it to one thing. He developed EFT. And then eventually some other people like me realized, well, the tapping doesn't seem really necessary. In fact, even Gary Craig eventually came to the same conclusion. So, but people will believe the thing that there's the mythology that gets passed down, and people say, oh yes, I have to do the tapping, have to do it in this particular order, have to tap these points. If you don't tap that point, then it's not going to work. And with the fast phobia cure, people believe, you know, you have to do it in this particular way. You have to use these particular cues. You have to have, you know, you have to rewind it. You have to do all these things. And if you don't do that, it won't work. Well, why? Says who? You know, try it out in these other ways and see. And similarly, in non-dual circles, there's a mythology. You know, if there's a technique that won't work. No techniques can work. There can't be a process. If there's a process, it's false. Says who? I mean, the crazy thing is, Ramana didn't say that. Other people determined that that was true. Brahma actually said, here's a process. Look for the eye. There was actually a process. So non-dual circle, yeah. It's just in spiritual, there are certain spiritual teachings that present themselves as non-dual spiritual teachings. They're particularly Western Neo-Advaita teachings that are broadly categorized under this umbrella of non-dual spiritual teachings. I mean, non-dual teachings are a very broad category, and then there are certain of these that are popular in contemporary times that um, that teach a lot of this kind of thing, like there is no self, and because there's no self, there's no one who can realize this. And so, and you might say, yes, but I'm suffering. I don't want to suffer. And they say, well, who is suffering? And then you say, well, I'm suffering. And they say, well, then just keep coming back, and eventually something will happen, even though there is no time, and there's no one, and there's no one to realize. Eventually, something will happen that will not be a happening, and it will not happen for anyone. And people just they just keep saying, okay, yes, this must be true because who knows? They just believe it. And so this becomes the dogma. And how many people are benefiting from that? Not a lot. And so Connie Ray was still perceiving that she was suffering, and she didn't like that. And she saw that there were some people who seemed to have had some kind of realization, some kind of discovery that allowed them to not suffer. But when she would ask them about how to repeat that, or what was the process that she could use, they would say, there is no process. If there's a process, that's not it. A process cannot give the result. It has to happen not as the result of a process. And it cannot happen for you because it cannot happen for anyone. And so just going round and round in circles. And she took it upon herself to discover some different way of understanding this. And so she created this process, which is really quite elegant. And so I'll just describe to you briefly what that process is so you could try it out for yourself. And for those who are in the Manifesting Truth program, then I do have a walkthrough of this in the Structure of Experience program course, so you have access to that. But the basic process here is you start with whatever the sense of the problem is. Okay, so fear of McDonald's, fear of the Wendy's trash, fear of dogs, not wanting to not wanting to feel fat, whatever the thing is. Everybody's got their stuff. Okay. And you just notice that there's an experience of that. You just notice that you have an experience of that. You feel that. And that you're actually representing that for yourself somehow. So you could notice, what's the location of it? And if your mind says, what do you mean location? That's nonsense. There couldn't be any location. You could just say, well, just play along. What if there was a location? Where would it be? So there's no wrong answer. It's just playful, right? You're just playing. So what if there was a location? What would it be? And you could just notice that location, and you could notice the size of it. And again, if you say, what do you mean a size? Well, just play along. What if there was a size? What would it be? And the shape of it. You could notice how it moves. You could notice the color. Maybe it has a sound. There's no, again, no right or wrong. It's just whatever you notice. And then you could notice that you are aware of that, right? So you're aware of whatever that experience is, the location, the shape, the color, the whatever other qualities it has. You're aware of that. And you could actually notice that that sense of yourself, we'll call that an I, like the letter I, that I itself has a location, right? So you're able to see or perceive that experience from a location. So you could notice now that I from which you are perceiving the experience. And you could notice that this I also has a location. And perhaps this I also has a shape and a size and whatever other qualities this I has. And if your mind says, what do you mean? How could an I have a shape or a location? You could just play along as if, so what if you were able to notice these things? What would the location be? What would the shape be? Remember, it's just playful because this is actually what you're already doing unconsciously, but you can now just bring it into conscious awareness. And then there's another funny thing that happens because you could start to realize, well, you're also aware of that I, right? You're aware of the location and shape and size of that I, which means that there's another I. And you could start to notice that I. So we call this the second I, just to give a word to it, okay? So this is the I that's aware of the first I. And that first I is aware of the experience. So you could notice this second I and notice the location of the second I and the size of the second I and the shape of the second I and all the other qualities of the second I. And you could even, if you wanted, of course, you could continue with this, right? Because, of course, if you're aware of the second I, then start to notice that I that's aware of the second I. And the location of that I, we'll call this the third I. Right? So it has a location and a shape and a size and whatever other qualities it has. And then what's possible is to explore the possibility of whether this I, so we'll say this third I, whether this third I might be willing to open into awareness. So awareness has no shape and no location, no qualities. It's infinite, boundless. So just an invitation to allow for this third eye to open into awareness if it wants to. So there's no demand, just an invitation. And oftentimes, the eye will accept that invitation. And if so, you may find that that's quite pleasurable. And then you could notice if that changes anything about the second eye. Doesn't always, but often it will. And you could then explore the possibility, just offer the opportunity, the invitation for this second eye to open to awareness. And it's just an invitation. And if that second eye chooses to accept that invitation, then you might notice if that changes anything about the first eye. It might, doesn't have to, but often there'll be some change. And then you could also extend the invitation to the first eye to open to awareness. And remember, it's just an invitation. It's perfectly fine, whatever this eye chooses. And if the first eye chooses to open to awareness, then you could perhaps notice if that changes anything about the original experience. And you could also extend that invitation to the original experience to open to awareness. And this is all just an exploration. There's no right or wrong. You could then be curious to see if there's anything different now about that whatever the issue was that started this exploration. If there's anything different about that in terms of your experience. So presumably at the start of the experience, you had some aversion. You preferred to avoid that, thinking about that or imagining that or experiencing that. And when you think about it now, you could just notice if that's changed. So of all the processes that I shared today, I think that one, the wholeness work approach, tends to give both the broadest and the deepest results. Um, Obviously, maybe is slightly more involved than certainly than the first approach, right? The first approach is the simplest to apply. And not to say that it cannot give, that the first approach cannot give good results. It's just to say that in my experience, I think the wholeness work approach does tend to give deeper and broader results more quickly. Um, but it's slightly more involved to do, at least to learn. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. I wanted to just to recap. So if you try to avoid things, then your energy is just getting sucked up into those things that you're trying to avoid, and you can't put that energy toward what you want. So you're going to probably just feel like you got a ball and chain attached to you, and you're going to wonder why things aren't working out. And hopefully after today's meeting, that's a little clearer to you, and hopefully it's clearer to you that you have options that you can explore that can give you better and different outcomes. And just to recap what that is, fundamentally, it's about reorienting yourself and discovering how you've been doing what you've been doing within yourself, and to give yourself new options so that you can change that. The first approach that I recommended, which was inspired by EFT, is just to have that alternation between, on the one hand, the imagining of whatever the problem is as you perceive it, and then on the other hand, to just invite that possibility of that open space of love and acceptance. The second method that I shared with you is inspired by or based on the fast phobia cure, and it's really just about um, shifting your representation of the perceived problem so that you're no longer so immersed in it, and you can then give yourself that perspective. So you do a double dissociation. So first you move it away and make it a third person view, um, and then you shift that to seeing yourself see that. And it's very simple, but it can be very effective. And then the third approach, which is more involved, but can be very powerful, is the based on the wholeness work of Connie Ray Andreas. Somebody's asking. And so if you wanted to learn that, there is a book available. I think it's just called The Wholeness Work or Wholeness Work. I'm not telling you you should get the book or anything. I'm just, for people who are interested. It's a simple process, and the book does describe how to do it. So if you wanted, you could learn it that way. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you can make use of that. And that's all I got for today. So for those who are here live, we'll stay on for the group coaching. For those who watch this on YouTube, if you'd like to join these live, you're welcome to do so. And if you do join live, then you have the opportunity to join for the group coaching session, which follows. So if you want to take advantage of that, you can sign up for my newsletter, and then you'll get all the information so that you can join these live. And for those who want to take this further, if you want support in an ongoing way, and you want to know what are the 9 simple lessons that give you the practical information so that you can get results in all areas of your life, you might be interested in the Manifesting Truth program, which is a paid program that I offer, and that's available. You can get more information on my website at joeylott.com/manifesting-truth, and I'll provide the links in the description on YouTube. So for those who are watching on YouTube, and really for everybody, blessings to you. And for those watching on YouTube, bye for now.